Sagittarius, your sister did something terrible behind your back, and a family member helped her. You didn't find this video by coincidence. Your soul guided you here, gently and insistently, like the arrow that always knows its true path. Beneath your strength, your wild laughter, your unwavering hope in the human spirit, there's a quiet ache you've tried to outrun. You were betrayed, not just by what someone did, but by who chose to stay silent. And in that silence, something sacred inside of you was wounded. This message is not about pointing fingers or stirring old anger. It's a sacred space where your truth is allowed to breathe. A place where no one tells you to move on too fast, or that you're imagining it. Today we slow down to name what was never named, to feel what you were told to forget, and to begin the journey of healing not with revenge but with clarity. So take a breath, Sagittarius. Let your fire simmer softly in your chest. Let your restless heart rest for a moment in this space where truth can finally land without fear. And if this message reaches a part of you that's been waiting to be seen, let it. Share it. Save it. Subscribe if you feel called to, not because it's expected, but because it's time you had a place where your soul is safe to speak. Your healing begins now. And in the next few minutes, you'll uncover the moment the betrayal began, not with what was done, but with who turned their gaze away. Let's begin. Gate 1. Betrayal doesn't begin with action, but with a soul turning away. Sagittarius, betrayal doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it walks in quietly, like the moment someone you trusted most chooses not to speak up when you needed them most. It's in the silence, the averted gaze, the "I didn't know what to say," that comes long after the damage is done. And for a soul like yours, brave, fiery, always seeking truth, that silence cuts deeper than any words could. You see, most people misunderstand you. They think Sagittarius is all laughter and freedom and wanderlust. But they don't see the quiet parts. The ones you protect. The ones that stay up at night wondering, why didn't they defend me? You're not someone who expects perfection from others, but you do expect truth, loyalty, presence. And when that's taken from you, not with shouts but with a look away, it feels like the whole sky has lied to you. I remember once sitting with a Sagittarius woman named Elise. She was in her mid-30s, vibrant, endlessly curious, the kind of person who lights up a room just by walking into it. But when we sat down for a healing session, her shoulders dropped like she'd been carrying a weight for 100 years. "I don't think I've ever trusted anyone fully again," she whispered. Her story unfolded like this. Years ago at a family gathering, her sister blamed her, unfairly, cruelly, for a financial mistake that had cost their parents dearly. Elise hadn't done it. She'd even offered to help fix it. But no one listened. What haunted her most wasn't her sister's accusation. It was her mother's silence. Her mother, the woman who used to braid her hair and call her my wild moon, said nothing. Just sat there. Let it happen. "I kept looking at her," Elise said, voice trembling, waiting for her to speak up, to say, "That's not true." But she just looked away. She picked up her tea. She adjusted the napkins. She left me there, alone. Sagittarius, I share this with you not because your story is the same, but because your feeling might be. That moment when the people you've defended, loved, protected, choose to say nothing when it's your heart on the line. The betrayal for you wasn't just a personal injury. It was a crack in the sacred code you live by. You were born under Jupiter, the planet of justice, truth, expansion. Your soul believes in the goodness of people, and even when you've been hurt, you keep extending that belief. You give people chances. You offer understanding. You forgive. But when someone stays silent while another harms you, that's not just pain, that's spiritual disorientation. You start to question everything. Was I too loud? Did I provoke this? Maybe I deserved it. And then your fire, the very thing that makes you Sagittarius, starts to dim. But here's the truth no one told you. Their silence wasn't your fault. It wasn't because you were too much. It wasn't because you were wrong. It was because they weren't brave enough to stand in the fire with you. They were afraid of confrontation, afraid of discomfort, afraid of the truth. And rather than face it, they let you burn alone. Let's pause here for a moment. Breathe, Sagittarius. Breathe into the ache that still lingers. Not to reopen the wound, but to cleanse it. To finally say, that hurt me. I needed you and you weren't there. You see, fire signs like you burn brightly, but even fire needs to be protected. You were taught to be strong, to be unbothered, to just move on. But strength isn't about pretending it didn't matter. Strength is naming the wound and healing it with full presence. And let's be honest, you've tried, haven't you? You kept showing up to family dinners. You kept asking how they were. You kept being generous even to the ones who stayed silent. You buried that part of you that wanted someone to say, "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." But your soul never forgot. And today we call that part of you back. You are not paranoid. You are not overreacting. You are not too sensitive. You are someone who lives deeply, who values honesty, who would never let someone else be humiliated while you sat and watched. And you have every right to expect the same in return. Maybe it wasn't a dinner table. Maybe it was a phone call that never came. A side conversation you weren't invited to. A knowing glance exchanged between others that left you feeling excluded. Maybe they didn't speak against you, but they didn't defend you either. And that silence echoed louder than any lie. And do you know what makes it harder? When you're Sagittarius, people assume you're okay. Because you laugh. Because you move forward. Because you make a joke and change the subject. But inside, you've been carrying questions like quiet scars. Why didn't they protect me? Why did they let it happen? Let me say this now, from the depth of my soul to yours. It mattered. Your pain matters. Your feelings are sacred. And what they did or didn't do was not okay. You don't need them to apologize to begin healing. You just need permission from yourself to stop protecting those who didn't protect you. And that, dear Sagittarius, is the beginning of your freedom. Because the same fire that once raged in grief can now rise in truth. Today you remember who you are. Not the version of you they misunderstood, but the soul who would never betray another in silence. The one who holds space for the voiceless. The one who walks away not with bitterness, but with clarity. Let that be your light. Because in the next part, we will uncover the deeper truth. That betrayal didn't come from just one person. Someone else stood behind them. Not passively, but quietly, knowingly. And that silence was a choice. Gate 2, when betrayal becomes a pact in silence. Sagittarius, there is a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't arrive with anger or cruelty. It comes with silence. It doesn't scream. It doesn't throw accusations. It simply steps back, folds its arms, and chooses not to act. It stands still while your soul breaks open. And that stillness, when it could have been courage, becomes the sharpest wound of all. You may have thought the pain came from what was said or done. From the sister who blamed you, the cousin who judged you, or the friend who turned the story against you. But the truth is, the pain that still lingers comes not from those who pointed fingers, but from the ones who stood nearby, watched, and did absolutely nothing. Sagittarius, your soul is ruled by fire. But it is not a fire that burns others. It's a fire that illuminates truth, that warms the spaces others have left cold. You are generous with your heart, fierce in your loyalty, and endlessly forgiving even when forgiveness hasn't been earned. And yet, even you, strong, vibrant, ever hopeful, can be brought to your knees by the echo of silence when someone should have stood beside you. There's a moment you may remember. Not because it was dramatic, but because it broke something you didn't realize was fragile. You were standing in a room, maybe literal, maybe symbolic, surrounded by people you once trusted. A sister made a false accusation. Someone laughed. Someone looked away. And someone you loved, perhaps a parent, a friend, a sibling, stood still. You searched their face for truth, for defense, for even the slightest sign that they would speak for you. But they stayed quiet. They poured tea. They scrolled their phone. They folded a napkin. And they left you completely alone with the weight of someone else's cruelty. I once sat with a Sagittarius woman named Elise. She was radiant, funny, creative, always the one to show up first and leave last at every family gathering. But when she shared her story with me, her voice trembled. It wasn't what my sister said, she told me. It was that my mom didn't say anything. She didn't even look at me. Her sister had blamed her for stealing family money, falsely, cruelly, but Elise didn't care about the words. She cared that the woman who raised her said nothing to stop it. I kept waiting, she whispered. Just for a "that's not true." Just for one hand to reach toward mine. But it never came. That's when betrayal becomes more than a single action. It becomes a pact. One person acts and another person lets it happen. They may not speak the same words, but they carry the same silence. And in that moment you are not only hurt, you are made invisible. You, Sagittarius, have always been the one to rise. You speak when others are silent. You stand up when others sit down. You've protected people who didn't deserve it. You've shown up to dinners even when your heart was broken. You've swallowed truths just to keep the peace. But who has done the same for you? You don't need drama. You don't need declarations. You just need someone to stand beside you when it counts. And when they didn't, it didn't just hurt, it changed the way you saw everything. Because you see, Sagittarius, people often misunderstand your fire. They think it means you don't need protection, that you'll always bounce back, that you're too independent to need comfort. But they don't see the parts of you that ache quietly. They don't see the tears you hide behind your laughter, or the doubt that creeps in when everyone else chooses comfort over courage. You've probably told yourself 1,000 times, maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I imagined it. But deep down, you know, you've always known. Your intuition has never lied. And the truth is, they saw everything. And they chose silence. That silence wasn't neutral. It wasn't passive. It was a decision. And in many ways, it was more wounding than the original betrayal. But here's something no one else may have told you. Their silence was not a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their fear. They were afraid to disrupt the illusion, afraid to be uncomfortable, afraid to lose the approval of the person who hurt you. And so they sacrificed your dignity for their ease. And you let it slide, because that's who you are. You always choose understanding. You always make excuses for the people you love. But that's the part of you that is learning to change now. Not because you've grown cold, but because you've finally grown clear. Clear that silence can be a weapon. Clear that neutrality in the face of injustice is still injustice. Clear that loyalty must go both ways. Sagittarius, you have carried this wound long enough. You've told yourself it wasn't a big deal. You've laughed through the discomfort. You've rationalized the abandonment. But now is the moment you reclaim your fire. Not to burn bridges, but to light your own way forward. Because the truth is, you never needed their validation. You never needed their apology. You just needed someone to acknowledge what happened. To say, I saw it. It was wrong. You deserved better. If no one else has ever said that to you, let me be the first. It was wrong. You did deserve better. And you don't have to keep protecting the ones who didn't protect you. You are Sagittarius. You were not born to be silenced. You were born to question, to seek, to name the truth even when others are afraid to face it. You are not too intense. You are not too emotional. You are not overreacting. You are just unwilling to live a life built on false peace. And today you are setting yourself free not from them but from the illusion that you ever had to keep accepting silence as love. In the next part, we'll explore something even deeper. Why you? Why did they choose to hurt you, to abandon you, to misunderstand you? And what you'll discover next, Sagittarius, might not only answer that question, it might finally give you the peace you've been seeking for years. Gate 3. Why did they choose to hurt you? Sagittarius, you've asked yourself this question in the quietest corners of your soul. Why me? Why did they choose to hurt me, to betray me, to walk away when I had done nothing but give, support, and love with all I had? And the most painful part is, you didn't ask it just once. You've asked it again and again like a mantra in reverse, every time someone failed to see your heart. Every time you were left to pick up the pieces alone. Every time you stood at the edge of a relationship, wondering how something once sacred became so one-sided. But let's be clear. You were never chosen for pain because you were wrong. You were chosen because you were different. Sagittarius, you shine in ways most people don't understand. You speak when others stay quiet. You challenge when others conform. You walk away when something doesn't feel aligned with your truth. And that unsettles those who fear honesty. You don't play roles. You don't wear masks. You live from the gut, from the heart, from that inner compass that has always pointed you toward the horizon, even when the path was lonely. And that frightens people. It's not your light they hate. It's what your light reveals. Around you, people are forced to see where they are small, dishonest, or hiding. You don't even need to say anything. Your presence alone is a mirror. And when people are not ready to face their own shadows, they project them onto the one who made them visible. You. The truth is, Sagittarius, you were never hard to love. You were just hard to control. And for many, love is only safe when it can be controlled, when it stays predictable, when it doesn't ask too many questions, when it doesn't burn too brightly. But you are a wildfire. Untamed, untethered, a seeker of divine truth wrapped in skin and stardust. You were not meant to stay small for anyone. I remember a man I once guided through deep healing. His name was Mateo, a Sagittarius with a heart like thunder and eyes that had seen too much too soon. He told me how he grew up in a family that demanded silence. They didn't like that. I asked why. He said, why we kept pretending everything was fine. Why no one talked about what was broken. I was the only one who didn't play along. And for that they ridiculed him, called him dramatic, rebellious, selfish. But what I saw in him, and what I see in you, was not rebellion. It was integrity. Sagittarius, you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to transform. And transformation scares people who aren't ready to leave behind their illusions. It's easier for them to call you difficult than to admit that their own way of being is rooted in fear. They didn't hurt you because you were weak. They hurt you because you were strong in ways they couldn't comprehend. They didn't exclude you because you lacked something. They excluded you because you carried something too rare, too precious, too awake. You were born with a vision they couldn't see, a depth they couldn't swim in, a fire they couldn't tame. And so they labeled it too intense, too much, too sensitive, too distant. But those labels were not yours to carry. They were theirs. Their discomfort, their limitations, their inability to hold the magnitude of your soul. You've spent so much of your life trying to soften, shrink, apologize for being different. You've toned yourself down in rooms that couldn't hold your brilliance. You've pretended not to care when you cared so much. You've laughed when you wanted to cry. You've forgiven people who never even noticed the damage they caused. But no more. Sagittarius, there is nothing wrong with the way you love, or lead, or speak, or shine. There is nothing wrong with wanting clarity, loyalty, realness. You were simply placed in environments that couldn't meet you where you were. And instead of saying, I'm not understood here, you said, maybe I need to change. But the truth is, you were never supposed to adapt. You were supposed to awaken. You were supposed to be the one who walked differently, spoke truthfully, lived fearlessly. Not to be the black sheep, but to be the trailblazer. The one who shows others what it looks like to live without masks. To love without attachment. To believe in justice even when no one else is watching. And maybe that's why you were chosen to carry pain. Because your soul is vast enough to alchemize it into light. Because you don't seek revenge. You seek understanding. And because even when they tried to tear you down, you still hope they'd come back with gentleness one day. You have lived through the ache of not being chosen. But let me tell you now, your soul was chosen by something much greater. The universe placed you exactly where you were meant to break cycles. Not to be a martyr, but to be a mirror of what healing looks like when it's done with grace. You weren't misunderstood because you were wrong. You were misunderstood because your clarity threatened the illusions they built their lives upon. And rather than change, they tried to change you. But no more. You've tried to fit in for too long. You've tried to be less for too long. And the more you tried to be what they wanted, the more they resented the version of you that still burned underneath it all. So now, dear Sagittarius, I want you to stop asking, why did they hurt me? And begin asking, why did I stay so long trying to earn their love? The answer is tender, because you are loyal, because you believed in people, because your heart is enormous, and there is nothing wrong with that. But now your loyalty must shift inward. You didn't lose them. You simply stopped hiding your truth. And anyone who walks away from your truth is not your loss. They are making space for those who will honor you, fully, wildly, beautifully. In the next part, we'll explore what comes after all of this pain. Because Sagittarius, you didn't choose retaliation. You chose release. You chose to walk away quietly, even when no one followed. And that is where your healing truly begins. Gate for forgiveness doesn't need an apology. Freedom doesn't wait. Sagittarius, you have waited long enough. Waited for them to see, to understand, to say the words they never did. You've carried the hope that one day they'd return, not necessarily to make things right, but to finally acknowledge what they did wrong. And maybe you even believe that if you just held on a little longer, they would come back with softness in their eyes, with honesty in their voices, and with the kind of remorse that brings closure. But they didn't, and maybe they never will. Because the truth is, Sagittarius, some people will never apologize. Not because they don't know they hurt you, but because they've never had the courage to face what lives inside them. Apology requires self-awareness. It requires humility. And it requires love, real love, the kind that makes a person want to grow. And sadly, not everyone reaches that place. Not everyone dares to meet their own reflection honestly. But you have. You've spent so many years reflecting, evolving, digging through the ruins of what hurt you just to find something whole. You've forgiven more than anyone ever realized. Not in words, but in the way you kept showing up with kindness. In the way you kept offering love. In the way you held space even when no one was holding it for you. Sagittarius, your ability to forgive is not weakness. It is power. But here's the truth your soul is now ready to accept. Forgiveness isn't something you do for them. It's something you do for you. You don't need them to come back. You don't need the perfect apology. You don't even need to be understood. You just need to be free. I once met a Sagittarius elder, a woman who had been estranged from her daughter for over a decade. The daughter had blamed her for a family rift, for things that weren't hers to carry. She told me, "I used to sit by the window every morning hoping she'd come back. I thought, just one phone call, one moment of truth. But it never came. And one day I realized she might never return. And I had to stop waiting in that window and walk into my own life." That's what forgiveness is, Sagittarius. It's not about reunion. It's not about fixing what broke. It's about turning inward and saying, "I no longer want to carry this pain into tomorrow." It's about choosing peace, not because the world gave it to you, but because your soul deserves it. Letting go doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It doesn't mean the betrayal disappears. It doesn't mean what they did was okay. Letting go means no longer dragging that hurt into every new conversation, every quiet night, every dream that wants to bloom in you. You've already sacrificed so much. Your voice, your trust, your fire. But not anymore. Because forgiveness is not surrender. It is not saying, "You win." It is saying, "This ends with me." You are the fire bearer, the truth seeker, the soul that never stopped believing in love, even when love abandoned you. And that is your gift. Sagittarius, it's time to stop asking if they've changed. Stop wondering if they miss you. Stop rehearsing what you'd say if they came back. Stop revisiting the scene, hoping this time someone will stand up for you. They won't. Not in the way you need. And that's okay, because this isn't about them anymore. It never really was. This is about you. Standing at the edge of your own light, finally ready to release the version of yourself who kept waiting to be chosen. You were never meant to be the one begging for love. You were meant to be the one who chooses herself over and over until the right souls appear. Not because you sought them, but because your light called them home. And they will come. There are souls out there, beautiful, quiet, gentle souls, who will never ask you to shrink, who will never punish you for being honest, who will sit beside you not because they understand everything, but because they want to. And you won't have to explain yourself to them. You will just be raw, wild, radiant, and they will stay. But you cannot receive them until you release what was never yours to hold. So breathe, Sagittarius. Breathe into the space that opens when resentment leaves. Breathe into the silence that no longer feels like abandonment, but begins to feel like peace. Forgiveness doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't even have to be spoken. Sometimes it is just a quiet whisper in your heart that says, "I let go." Not because they deserve it, but because I do. You've carried the weight of waiting for too long. You've stood at that door with your hand on the handle, wondering if opening it would lead to healing. But healing was never behind that door. It was always inside you. You don't need anyone's permission to walk away. You don't need proof that you were right. You don't need them to come back and make it make sense. You only need one thing, the decision to stop looking back. Because from here forward, the story belongs to you. Not them. Not the pain. Not the silence. Just you, and the fire you were always meant to carry. In the final part of this journey, Sagittarius, you'll come home to a truth even deeper than forgiveness. A truth that will remind you, you didn't lose your family. You're about to find your soul family. The ones who see you, hold you, love you, exactly as you are. Conclusion, you didn't lose them. You found yourself. Sagittarius, now that we've walked through the fire, the silence, the questions, the truth, now that we've named what others refuse to acknowledge, I want you to take one more breath. A real one. Not the kind you take to stay strong, to stay silent, or to hold back the tears, but a breath that belongs entirely to you. Let it rise from the center of your chest, where the pain once lived, and let it fill the space where your freedom now begins. Because here is what I know to be true: you didn't lose them. You lost the illusion that they were willing to meet you where your soul lives. You lost the fantasy that silence could ever mean love. You lost the hope that if you just waited long enough, they would choose you the way you've always chosen them. But what you found in return is priceless. You found your voice. Not the one shaped to make others comfortable, but the one that sings in your native language of truth. You found your strength, not in holding everything together, but in allowing what needed to fall away to fall. You found your light. Not the one you lent to others to make them feel whole, but the one that's been burning at your core since the beginning of this lifetime, waiting for you to finally turn inward and see it. And now that you've seen it, how could you ever forget it again? This wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a passage into your own power. It was the final unraveling of everything you were never meant to carry, and the quiet rebuilding of everything you truly are. You Sagittarius are not too much. You are not hard to love. You are not the one who needs to change. You are the one who remembers how it feels to love deeply, to live honestly, to walk away with integrity when no one else has the courage to follow. That is your gift. That is your healing. That is your liberation. And if this journey resonated with something deep inside you, don't hold it in. Share it with someone who might need it. Share it with a fellow soul who's been waiting to hear. You are not alone. Save this space. Let it be a sanctuary you can return to on days when you forget, on days when the silence creeps back in, on days when you just need someone to remind you that your truth is valid, your fire is sacred, and your soul is on the right path. Subscribe if you feel called to. Not because this is a channel, but because this is a home. A space where your wounds are not a burden, where your story is safe, where your light is never too much. And remember this, Sagittarius. Your journey didn't begin with pain, and it doesn't end with loss. It continues now with a wiser, freer, truer version of you. One who walks forward not waiting for love to return, but ready to receive love that never asks you to become someone smaller, quieter, safer just to be accepted. May you always have the courage to choose yourself. And may the next chapter of your life be written in the language of freedom, fire, and truth. We'll see you in the next video. And until then, keep shining.